went over and dropped notes in our camp saying, roll out the barrel, see you at 8 o'clock tonight. And so, of course, we picked up all these notes. And by gosh, 8 o'clock that night, they broke the walls down. And in came all these tanks and these boys with helmets on. They looked like men from Mars. And I was running up and down with these tanks, yelling and screaming. And they kept saying, get back in the building, get back in the building, because of the snipers that were in the camp. A couple of days after that, they shelled us for 3 days and 3 nights. And we had something like 38 operating tables going that night. And my sister and I were carrying water back and forth. And we lost a lot of internees. And a lot of friends of mine were killed after liberation. One girl just got engaged to one of the boys, and she got shrapnel in her stomach. And she was killed that morning. But it was really quite an ordeal.
My name is William Boyan. I'm from Englewood, New Jersey. I came with a group with the tanks that liberated Santo Tomas University on the night of February 3rd, 1945. We were split up from our outfit. We were a regimental combat team following the 1st Cavalry, but we got chopped up on the way into Manila, and we got lost, and we met these guys with the tanks and came in and liberated the prison camp about 8 o'clock at night. Broke through the gate, and I can remember the guy in the lead tank saying, are there any Americans in here? And we got the answer, and they came out.
Is that Battling Basics or Georgia Peach?
Probably was Georgia Peach, I would say. I don't remember the names on the tanks, but we were glad to get the ride. We had walked 197 miles from Lingayen Gulf and making breaks in between when we were battling the Japanese. And then we got split up outside of Pampanga, and then came up through Rizal Avenue. We met these guys, and we were glad to get the ride to Manila. Everything was burning, and we found these people in Santo Tomas. Then we went on down towards Bilibid, and then a few days later we were within about 200 feet of Las Banos, but the 11th Airborne beat us in and jumped in. Ahead of us, Tom Mesereau, who passed away about a year ago, who lived in Laguna Beach, was leading the raid. We were shocked to see so many people being interned, especially the children. We didn't realize, you never think of children being prisoners of war.
When the Japanese took the Philippines, they immediately picked up my father, and he was taken to Santo Tomas. Eventually, and my mother was allowed to stay out because she was German, my stepmother, and my brother and I. Eventually, we were interned in Santo Tomas, and we spent the first several months there. And then the Japanese allowed the parents to send their children to a Catholic convent, the Holy Ghost convent, and my brother and I were sent to that convent where the nuns taught us school, and the priest taught us football and soccer, that was at the time, and we did weaving and so forth, and got better treatment. And our parents were brought to visit us about every 2 weekends, and they came to see us at the camp. Eventually, the Japanese closed that down and started bringing everybody into Santo Tomas. They started bringing in ministers and priests and so forth because things were not going so well for the Japanese, and they kept bringing more and more people into the camp, and eventually sick people. And so they enlarged Santo Tomas by moving the fence around the hospital and to take care of those. And then when the camp got a little bit more crowded, they opened up another camp south of Manila called Los Banos, which means the baths, and it was an agricultural school of the University of the Philippines, I believe. Well, they first sent down single men and women to that camp to get it prepared, and I guess it was a bad trip for them because they were sent down in rather crowded railroad cars. But eventually the Japanese asked for volunteers to go down to that camp, and my parents volunteered, and one morning we were loaded up into trucks and we were taken to this camp, Los Banos, where we stayed, and we had regular school. The parents and the people organized schools. We had games, but as the time went on, we got less and less food. till towards the end there we were down to 1 meal a day, a very little bit of rice, and what we had been able to save and hoard of Red Cross packages that the Japanese did finally give us there a couple of times. But I still remember vividly the day of the rescue when we woke up and went out that morning for roll call. While in the camp, we had a Boy Scout troop. We called it the Rangers because I guess the Japanese didn't like the Boy Scouts idea. And we practiced welcoming ceremonies as we heard the gunfire in the distance, and we were going to stand by the gate and welcome the Americans as they came marching, just like in the movies, through the gate to welcome us, to rescue us. But it didn't happen that way. It happened very suddenly. One morning when we went out for roll call, and we looked up in the sky and saw paratroopers start to jump from airplanes on a field near our camp. And about that time, guerrillas and paratroopers who had infiltrated earlier around the camp started firing at the Japanese, the machine gun nests and so forth. Most of the guards were caught completely by surprise because they were out doing their exercises. All their rifles were stacked up neatly, and the paratroopers caught them completely by surprise. The firing went on for quite a while, about 45 minutes, while we were laying on the floor of the barracks, which were grass shacks, and bullets were flying back and forth through the barracks because there was nothing to stop them. Eventually, troops came into the barracks, and we thought that they were Germans because we had never seen the World War II helmets. We'd seen the flat kind, and finally figured out that they were Americans. And they told us that we had to get out of there in a hurry because there were more Japanese nearby who were coming, and we had to get on these amphibious Amtraks. So we grabbed what we could carry and went out the barracks, and the barracks were being burned right behind us. They loaded us into amphibious tanks and took us on. We went down the road towards the lake. As we got near the lake, a Japanese machine gun nest opened up on us, and the kids were all sitting up along the edge of the upper part of the Amtrak, and the machine gunner, with one motion as he swung the machine gun around to answer the Japanese fire, took his arm and pushed us all down into the inside of the amphibious tractor. And I can still recall my brother, who was under the machine gun. The empty bullets cases would land on his back, and he kept saying, "Ouch, they're shooting me, help, they're shooting me." But after that, the Japanese nest was silenced, and so we went on across this big lake over to U.S. territory, because we were in Japanese territory. When we got to the other side, we encountered a field kitchen where they were making donuts or something for the troops, not for us, but we immediately got in line, and I can remember getting a whole cup of sugar and eating that whole cup of sugar because we would go for any food that was available. They loaded us onto trucks and took us to what was a former Philippine penitentiary, where we were given blankets and hard bunks to sleep on. And we got in line for food 3-4 times. We just gorged ourselves. I guess the Army wasn't wise to us at the time, because we just got sick, terribly sick, because we weren't used to all that food. So they gave us meal passes, thinking that would keep us from eating too much. Well, we got around that by looking for soldiers who were named Wheeler, or somebody from Iowa, where my dad was from, and we'd talk them out of Spam, powdered milk, fruit cocktail, you name it. But we were the biggest cumshaw artists that you ever saw. We were given food there and medical treatment and so forth. And eventually we were then taken to Manila and loaded up onto transports after being taken out on landing craft, because the harbor was so full of sunken ships they could not get a regular ship in. So they put us on landing craft and took us out to the Admiral Eberly, and we were eventually brought to, after stopping in Honolulu to pick up immigration, we were brought to San Pedro, California.
Yes, I was part of the Internee Guard organization, And I was on guard duty at the woodpile or the camp gardens or wherever I got assigned from 3 to 5 in the morning with my shift.
So you were just getting off the shift.
So I got off at 5, and they had made an arrangement with the Japanese that those of us who had that 3 to 5 shift could simply sleep in, because we would have just gotten back to sleep about the time it was time for us to line up out in front for a head count. Yeah, 7 o'clock each morning, they went around and did a head count. We'd line up by 4s out in front of the barracks. And so I didn't have to go out. And I was still in the sack, and somebody hollered, "Parachutes!" I think I hit the ladder once on the way down, and looked out the side door that we'd made from our cubicle, and the sky was just, you know, full of these what looked like long boxes coming down under parachutes. And of course, I guess most of it was the paratroopers, and probably some equipment in boxes. But I ran back inside, grabbed my yellow armband, and went tearing up the hall to where my captain was, and I said, "What's my assignment?" And he said, "You go up to barracks 26 and 27 and make sure they stay inside." Problem. 26, where the Protestant chapel was in the back, and 27, where the Roman Catholic chapel was in the back, were separated by a big space where 3 barracks had blown down in a typhoon. So I kind of doubted whether I'd have time to get to both of them physically. But having a rather strong voice, I went tearing out. I went over to barracks 17. I was living in 16. Out through 23, the back half of which was auxiliary hospital. Went up to the road where I could see, and cupped my hands and just yelled at the people out in front of 26. Get down, get back inside, and yelled the same thing for barracks 27, and I just kept alternately yelling at one and the other.
That's probably why there were very little people.
Until finally they retreated. Then I went back into 23, told the people that were lying in beds there, stay in their beds. It's probably just as safe as anything else you could do. Don't try to get up or get on the floor. And then the front half was men's barracks, and I said, everybody better hit the deck, because things had broken loose by then. Then a fellow who had been on the previous internee guard group and had been in and out of the camp a few times with intelligence that helped to get the word back what was needed. I don't remember his name. He
Filipino?
No, an American. But he had close contact with the guerrillas, and also got intelligence word back to the command. And so they knew, for instance, that too many of us would be too weak to follow their number 1 plan, which was to have us open a corridor and walk down the beach past the enemy lines. And we were about 10 miles behind the lines still. So they brought down these Amtraks from Lingayen, where their landing had been up there. At any rate, he came through and he said, "Okay, we got the camp secured. Tell everybody, grab what you can carry and let's go down to the lake." I was the last civilian to get on board the last Amtrak, except for the 3 rear guard, at, I think it was either 5 minutes of 2 or 5 minutes after 2, which was just 7 hours from the 7 o'clock jump. So the timing, everything worked out perfectly. What I heard was that we lost a lieutenant on one of the Amtraks to a sniper in a coconut tree, and that there were some minor things like sprained ankles and stuff in the jump. But that lieutenant and 2 guerrillas were the only ones killed in that action, which was very amazing. They had expected heavy casualties. They had not expected to get more than maybe half of us out alive. But every internee who was alive at the beginning of the rescue was alive and rescued. Amazing feat. An amazing feat. Like a miracle.
Yeah.
My name is David DeVries, and I was in Manila going to high school at the time the Second World War broke out. I was a sophomore in high school, and as soon as hostilities began, I and several other Boy Scouts were pressed into service as ambulance corpsmen, and we served in this capacity until just 3 or 4 days before the Japanese came into the city. I was interned in the University of Santo Tomas compound called Santo Tomas Internment Camp for 15 months, and after this time I was transferred with 800 men and several Navy and Army nurses to Los Banos, the site of the Los Banos Agricultural School, to the south and east of Manila, 37 miles away. And I spent the next 22 months at this site until we were ultimately liberated by the 11th Airborne parachute drop and taken out of camp in amphibious tractors, or Amtraks as they were called, and then spent a considerable time recovering from this ordeal. Reunions such as this that we have just had here are really very significant in our lives of those that attend with us, because these kinds of experiences are of particular significance to us, but can only be shared from a in-depth, at a heartfelt depth, you might say, with those who had a similar experience. And so for this reason that we find it a very significant part of our lives to get together for reunions such as this, and we really are very enthusiastic about it, and look forward to meeting again to do the same thing.
Well, I'm Kitty Charter originally, but I've married a Miller, so I'm now Kitty Miller. I was born and raised in the Philippines. My father went out there in 1911. He went out there to do a contract job, and it turned out that he put in the plumbing for the Manila Hotel. My mother followed him, and in 6 months she came out in 1912. So most of us my family were born out there in the Philippines. And we went to American school and Central School. We were all caught, of course, by the Japanese. My father, my mother, my sister, my brother-in-law Harper, and they had 2 small children, and myself, who was 19. We were all caught and put in Santo Tomas first, and later on transferred to Los Banos. And it was there that we were liberated by the 11th Airborne. And I walked out of there with a 24, I got married in camp, of course, the Reverend Fonger in 44, and walked out of there with a 24-day-old baby who now lives in Chicago and has 5 children. So I guess there's nothing wrong with her or me. Well, it was pretty bad in the last 6 months, worse in the last 3 months. It was pretty difficult carrying a baby and being so hungry all the time. Shortly after the planes went over in September, all of us decided we were going to go around trading recipes, and we did nothing the last 3 months except trade recipes. It was like a craziness that we had, that we knew that we would be liberated soon, but we didn't know when. And we just were so hungry, just could think of nothing but food, food. And of course, at this time, I was having a baby, and it was pretty difficult, but I managed to survive.
The tank that broke down the gate, as I remember, was battling basic. And we got into, I didn't get in the first night. I came 2 days later. We got in there, and the Japanese shelled the compound of Santo Tomas University intermittently all the time we were in there. So I went down to the Pasig River, and I saw that some of the shelling was coming out of the south side of the Pasig River from a building, probably one of the government buildings, just across the Pasig and east of the walled city, Internees. And I could see the flashes of the artillery coming out of there. So we began shelling in there where these people were, and eventually stopped the shelling from the south side of the Pasig River that was coming into Santo Tomas. I talked to other people and told them how we had gotten down there, and told them that I had flown across them 2 days before in a light Cub airplane, you know, kind of built out of orange crates and canvas, and that we had no trouble crossing Santo Tomas. But when we went to the Pasig River, we were shot at very much and went down real low, below the anti-aircraft fire, and turned around and went back out to where the rest of the 1st Cavalry Division was located. By that time, when we were being shot at the Pasig River, the flying column was well on the way down and was in the neighborhood of Novaliches and on the way into the Chinese cemetery. There was a little action at the Chinese cemetery. The main action of the flying column took place after we got into Manila, and I think it was F Troop of the 8th Cavalry went down to Malacanang Palace on the Pasig River, and they lost quite a few men in capturing the seat of the government of the Republic of the Philippines at Malacanang. The rest of the flying column stayed in Santo Tomas. The big thing that we had for the internees were truckloads and truckloads of food and clothing and that type of thing. And I remember how thin they were and how the Japanese who were still there were not feeding them. And we had a colonel named Todd Brady who commanded the second in command to General Chase of the flying column, and he went to the Japanese and said, if you will, the Japanese had taken some hostages and put them upstairs in Santo Tomas. And Todd Brady said, he's now dead, would you let we'll let you go if you'll let the hostages out and get away from the internees that are here. So the Japanese decided to do that, and they marched out the second day after the flying column had got into the University of Santo Tomas, and they marched west. And we had contact with the 37th Division, which had by then gotten into Manila also, a day or two later than the 1st Cavalry Division. And we informed them that the Japanese were coming from the east to the west toward Manila Bay. And whatever happened to them, I don't think was very happy for them, and I think they met a very fast and, you might say, a brutal end. But they had been anything but kind, courteous, and beneficent to the people who were in Santo Tomas. In one word, they looked like hell. They were thin and worn to a frazzle, and they had been harassed and fed very little, if anything. The people from Santo Tomas, some people that went down to Los Banos had been let out earlier, and I was told that those at Los Banos had been people who had contacts across the wall of Santo Tomas complex, and they were living so much better than many of the other people in Santo Tomas who had more or less self-rule, that it was decided that they should be taken somewhere else where they were not a morale factor for the bulk of the people who remained in Santo Tomas. Afterwards, I saw the people from Los Banos who were rescued by the 511th of the 11th Airborne Division at New Bilibid Prison at Alabang, halfway between Manila and Los Banos, and just west of Laguna de Bay. Afterwards, after the war, I joined the 11th Airborne Division and knew many people who had been on the operation that went across Tagaytay Ridge and into Los Banos, the agricultural school, and released and got the people out of Los Banos. I went back one time after I'd gone over to Moban and Naga City and talked to people in Santo Tomas. Those internees stayed there. And this was 2 months later, and they looked so much better. And I would say of a military career of 31 years, that was the highlight of my entire military career. I fought in the Philippines and Los Negros in New Guinea and the Admiralties, and in Korea with the 11th and the 187, and also in Vietnam. But the highlight of my entire military career was the release of the prisoners from Santo Tomas.
Internees went to school together when we were kids. American School, Bordner Central School, and Brent School. This young man was liberated in Los Banos by the 11th Airborne Division. So was this young lady. Patty Jean Croft Kelly was liberated in Los Banos from with the 11th Airborne. And you speak for yourself.
Well, my sister and I was in Billy Carroll's show, and we danced and we did the hula on the stage, and we were in the entertainment section. Earl Carroll, yeah,
Carroll,
and
Bill, what's his name?
Dave Harvey. Dave Harvey, yes, yes.
And don't you remember I
So-
used to get up and play the accordion?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and my sister and I. So I still sing. I sing with the choir, with the church choir.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's
I still do the hula too.
What's the Stage Under the Stars? What's the name?
Yeah, Stage Under the Stars. Mm-hmm.
Was
Yes.
that- I don't remember the name.
Yeah,
of
that's
the
it.
stage.
Yes. And this one is great on the accordion. She plays the accordion beautifully. Anything, you name it. I mean, the mambo, the bamba, the whole bit. Oh, that's a naughty question. That's a naughty question. We were
17,
young adolescents when the war broke out. And we still saw each other during the whole war. We were together during the whole, it was like one big family. So we are closer than most friends would be ordinarily. Ordinarily, you see your friends, once a month, twice a month, 3 times. This was a daily thing. Day and night people were together. Young friends were together. So It was like one big family.
Our entertainment at nighttime was to grab a chair, go out in the front of the building, put it down. My ex-husband's chair had a big monkey on the back, and everybody always used to look for him. They'd look for that monkey on the back of the chair. And but this was our entertainment. Well, outside of the shows that we would give, you know, and tap dancing, and I'd get up and do a rumba with one of the fellas. Remember Ronnie Lang?
Ronnie Lang.
Ronnie and I did the rumba together.
What did they play over the camp radio?
Yeah,
The Andrews Sisters. But I was just thinking about the
And
first song.
Pennies from Heaven was, they'd play Pennies from Heaven, and that meant the bombs were dropping someplace. Every song had a meaning.
Right.
And like we were on the vegetable detail, and they would announce in the morning, ladies, don't forget vegetable detail this morning, better latey than never. Because see, the Jap, this is how he says late, is latey, so it went over his head. But with us, latey, did you hear latey? Latey, hey, later, better late than never.
right.
And this is how word got around, you know, to camp.
signal.
Was through Hornbothel, actually, because he got the radio system. Yeah, yeah.
Camp. And that's how they got all the news.
This is Jocelyn Rogers Fravel. I was in Santo Tomas in Holy Ghost, and my mother was interned there with 5 children, Evelyn, myself, and my brother Charles, my sister Dorothy, and Anne, our little baby sister. And this is my husband. He was one of our liberators, and we met and got married, and here we are. Anne, would you like to say something?
Nothing much to say, except that our father was over Maravellas, ended up in Corregidor, the Bataan Death March, and Cabanatuan also.
You never made it to...
No. I started off at Holy Ghost and then Santo Tomas. And I'm looking forward to knowing others who are my age, between 4 and 7 during those war years. Maybe they remember picking up camote peelings from under the kitchen tables.
I'm Grace Nash. I'm here at the reunion, and my husband, Ralph Nash, couldn't come because he's not very healthy right now. We had 3 sons in prison camp. We were in Santo Tomas and Los Banos, and our 3rd son was born during imprisonment. I just want to say that we're all doing pretty well, and very grateful to the paratroopers and all of the ones involved in so many different areas of our rescue. I feel that the young people today who don't know anything about imprisonment, need to know something. And I found that I wrote the book 2 years ago, That We Might Live, so that my sons, dedicated to our sons, so they might know and their children know what they had gone through in growing up and during war. Out of that has come many letters, from even a book review and an interview from a 10-year-old child who read it, finding that this is something that she felt her classmates should know about. I think that children today should know something of the past of Americans and American territory, of what war means. There is no fiction in the book, but it is a human interest story of how we survived, both inside, outside, underground, and overground. We're just very grateful to be alive, and it's been a long time, and many different areas, different kinds of rehabilitation. But I think it's been a wonderful thing to get together with all of the many people here, and to hear Claude Bus.
Yeah, I'm George Mora. I live nearby here in Foster City, California. Tina and I had the privilege of putting this conference together for the internees and 11th Airborne folks that rescued us, and 1st Cavalry people that did. My particular story is I was growing up in the Philippine Islands when the war started, minding my own business, going to high school. I was a junior in high school, and a month later I was a prisoner of the Japanese along with my mother and father, and started out in Santo Tomas Prison Camp, and then later was among the first 800 able-bodied men single men to be shipped down south to Los Banos to start populating a new prison camp that the Japanese had established to handle the overflow from Santo Tomas and from smaller camps around Luzon. I was in my first contact with internee get-togethers was in 1980. I was kind of a late comer because we all move all over the world after we got out of prison camp, and so we were hard to reach. My mother happened to find out about a meeting that was held in San Mateo at the Elks Club in 1980, and she called me down in Los Angeles where I was working at the time, and I came up and joined her and we attended. And so for the first time I had my name on a list of attendees somewhere, and my address got into the system. So I've been able to attend a few other functions, one in Vegas and one in Fullerton, of internees. And with every meeting that we get together, we pick up some more people that learn that there is an organized activity of some kind ongoing with internees. So this conference here, we saw people from China that had never known. There were prisoners of war in China that hadn't known about internee activities, and it's their first time on board, and some from Santo Tomas and Los Banos that didn't know about us. So this is very rewarding, to be able to include people under the umbrella of our social activities and our nostalgia trips that we go on. It's real rewarding to enable these people to join with us. And for me, it's been personally rewarding to see folks I hadn't seen. Last night, I saw a gentleman that was my teacher in Los Banos. He was a professional person. He put on classes, and I saw him last night for the first time in 40-some years. And another person also for the first time since we were rescued. Henry Johnson, who was in camp with us, Henry Sue Johnson, who's a professor of clinical psychology at UC Long Beach down south. He's a national director of civilian affairs for the American Ex-Prisoner of War organization. And he called Tina and I to help out to set up a Memories 2, which was to be a follow-up to Memories 1, which was held in Fullerton 2 years ago, and to get something going up here in the Bay Area. So that's how I came to be involved. And it's been great, and it's been a lot of work. I'm glad I was able to donate some of my time and energies. I'm looking forward to Memories 3, which just might be, we're talking about the possibility of being held somewhere in the east, maybe Atlanta, close to the Andersonville Prison Camp Museum. Thank you very much.
I think George said it all about the camp.
Okay, you can go on. I don't want to move. Okay, Tina, just a few words from you.
As I say, I think George said it all about the camp. Same thing.
Same here, but my name is Frank Stagner, and I'm a volunteer because I live nearby, and I've always wanted to do something for the group, and here the opportunity came, or arrived, shall we say. And I live nearby, and I was 9 years old. I'm from Santo Tomas. I was 9 years old when I was captured by a Japanese patrol, and I spent 3 years in Santo Tomas after a short visit at Fort Santiago as a guest of the Japanese military police. And, well, it's hard to say when you're younger. We all have different stories, and every child had his own views on life over there. So anyway, I was happy the convention or conference here was a success, and I thank you.
I, for one, plan to donate most of what I have pertaining to my internment to Andersonville. And I feel that it is important because as one curator, of a museum in Greensboro told me, he asked me if I would donate some of my things to the museum in Greensboro. He said, you know, you pass these things on to your children, and they're interested, and then these are passed on to your grandchildren, and then they might end up in the attic, and the history of them might be forgotten, and then they might be thrown out or discarded, or their significance is lost, whereas if they're donated, then they're kept and preserved and well cared for. And I think that it's good that we have some place where people can do research and can see something that pertains to those who have been prisoners of war.
This morning we are assembled here to honor and pay our respects to the memory of those of our number who have passed on since recent reunions, and those who died in internment camps. and those who died during the several rescue and liberation operations. To do this, we shall light 3 candles, each one in honor of these groups. For the internees, guerrillas, and Filipino nationals, we have is going to be represented by one of the candles. For members of the 11th Airborne Division, another candle, and the 3rd candle for members of the 1st Cavalry Division. To represent internees and others is Mr. Bill Rivers. To represent the 11th Airborne Division is Mr. Skeeter Young. And to represent the 1st Cavalry Division is Mr. Joe Cardoza. Following the candle lighting, we ask that you file by the candles from your right to the left, down through the front, towards the back of the room, and ask that the last person snuff out the candles. I don't have an official snuffer here, but you can blow them out if you like. Before we begin with this, then, I would like to interject that I hope that you folks will be thinking ahead towards a similar meeting as this, perhaps Memories Together 3 in 2 or 3 years hence. And we would also appreciate any kind of an input you might give us concerning how you would do this differently. And we plan a little bit of continuity, at least, to others who will be doing this, and so we want to give them our suggestions. And so we certainly would appreciate yours. So now, without further ado, we'd ask these gentlemen in turn to come forward and light the appropriate candle, then to be followed by the other 2. Mr. Rivers.
For all of the internees and guerrillas who have not reached this stage, who did not make it here,
Mr. Cardoza. Mr. Cardoza. Thank you. Mr. Skeeter Young.
all members of the 11th Airborne who are no longer with us.
We ask then that you might file past here around to the back of the room. We'd start right here at the front.